Hello and welcome to the City of Seattle's Department of Education and Early Learning's info session about the Seattle Preschool Program and Seattle Preschool Program Pathway Request for Investment for the 2016-17 school year. Today we're going to be talking about the Seattle Preschool Program and the Seattle Preschool Program Pathway, a brief overview of those programs, a little payment overview about Seattle Preschool Program, and we'll touch a little bit on the pathway as well. The evaluation criteria for the request for investment process, how to submit your request for investment, and then how we'll handle any questions that come in. So let's start here with the Seattle Preschool Program and the Seattle Preschool Program Pathway. So we want to be clear that these are two separate programs. SPP and SPP Pathway have different minimum qualifications and program requirements, and they also have different payment structures. A organization or applicant can apply for either the SPP or the pathway, or they can apply for both. We will be using the same form and application for both SPP and SPP pathway applicants. So regardless of which one you want to apply for, you've come to the right place and you've found the right application. So what is the Seattle Preschool Program, also known as SPP? It's a 4-year levy-funded demonstration project working towards the goal of creating a voluntary, citywide, high-quality preschool program for Seattle's 3- and 4-year-old children. The Pathway Program is for providers who do not yet meet SPP minimum qualifications but would like to eventually become SPP qualified. And the Pathway is for providers to be on for up to 2 years. So in the current school year, we are funding 15 classrooms serving 280 children within the Seattle Preschool Program. In the next school year, we intend to identify up to 25 additional classrooms for a total of 39 classrooms serving up to 780 children for the 2016-17 school year. Under the Pathway Program, which for a little information is the formerly known as a Step Ahead program that was funded under the Families and Education Levy, that's rebranded to offer a pathway for programs to get to SPP requirements. But you'll again have 2 years to meet those SPP eligibility requirements. We do intend for this upcoming 16-17 school year to fund 66 slots under the Pathway Program. So here's a breakdown of the main differences between SPP and SPP Pathway. So for SPP, you'll need to be licensed, early achievers rated 3 or higher, and be operating preschool for a full day. So we define full day as minimum 6-hour day, 5 days a week, 180 days a year. For the Pathway, you don't necessarily need to be licensed, early achievers rated, or participating, and you can be part day within the Pathway Program. You could meet some of this criteria, all of this criteria, but still be interested in the Pathway. For some providers, the Pathway is a way to kind of dip their toe into the SPP pool before fully committing to the Seattle Preschool Program and its requirements. So SPP is funded by classroom, and we require that you apply a minimum of 2 classrooms, whereas the Pathway is funded by slots or children, and we require a minimum of 8 slots, and those need to be within 1 classroom, those 8 slots. Both programs have access to professional development from the city, curriculum training, and coaching. Both programs have access to facilities funds, and we'll talk a little bit more about the facilities funds later. SPP does have access to teacher education funds, whereas the Seattle Preschool Program Pathway does not have access to those teacher education tuition funds. So we talked a little bit about the minimum qualifications in the last slide, but here are some basic definitions. We're looking for licensed by the State Department of Early Learning, must be enrolled in Early Achievers and hold a rating of 3 and higher, and the program size must be 2 or more classrooms to be SPP qualified. As mentioned earlier, for the Pathway, the minimum qualifications say you can meet some, all, none of the above qualifications, but the key is that you're willing to commit toward working toward meeting those qualifications. So each program, SPP and SPP Pathway, do have different requirements, and you'll see there at the top of the slide that on pages 6 through 8 on the RFI, you'll see more detail about class size, child eligibility, teacher education, classroom hours, family engagement, professional development, and coaching, the differences between each program and the requirements. So successful applicants must adhere to these requirements. And you'll see a sample contract that goes into even more detail about kind of what those requirements look like for a potential provider. And you'll see that as well on our website, that sample contract. So let's talk a little bit about payment. So you can reference pages 4 and 5 in the RFI. But payment for SPP starts at $8,500 per child. And that's for programs that meet the minimum qualifications and serve 20 children per classroom. So that payment can be adjusted up based on teacher or staff education qualifications and other public funds that a provider might be applying towards students, whether that's DSHS, ECAP, or Head Start. And that number could be adjusted down if you are serving less than 20 students in a classroom. So the pathway is different. It's funded based on your EA level. So if you're a full day participant, you can see the range there, 79 to 8,800. Part day, 63 to 7,200. And if you are not yet participating in Early Achievers, you will automatically be paid at the Tier 1 level. So let's think about some of those staff requirements that could adjust the SPP, not the pathway, the SPP payment upward. So you'll see here that if a lead teacher does meet that requirement of a BA in early childhood or the equivalency requirement, which you can see more detail about in the SPP program plan, it's a total of a $21,000 increase towards the provider, which roughly works out to be $1,000 per student. And so on, you'll see teacher assistant, if you meet that requirement, how that increase would work, and then again, if the director or supervisor meets that requirement, how that increase would work as well. So now let's talk a little bit about kind of what we commonly hear of as braiding and blending of funding. So within SPP, if you do operate a program that incorporates another source of funding, DSHS, ECAP, Head Start, that funding will be blended together here with your SPP funding, but then there will be an amount that is left additional to you as a provider as a recognition that requirements for these programs are different, that not everything within Head Start or ECAP and SPP completely overlap. There are additional things which require additional funding. And so in our modeling of how this program will work, we've kind of created rates based on how much of the program does not overlap and how much funding should be reflected there. So you'll see those amounts here for Head Start, for full day versus half day ECAP, for part day versus full day DSHS. And this is, again, that part that remains extra after the blended funding that would be on top of that amount that SPP provides, blended together with the other government subsidy funds, and then there would be an extra amount, as I just said. That's those numbers here in the right column. So the city also has additional funds available to SPP providers. So there's classroom startup money, there's money for classrooms to do family engagement activities, there's funding to support special populations, tuition assistance for teachers, release time, and facilities funds. And those are all outside of that per child amount that we talked about in previous slide. For Pathway, there is classroom startup funds, release time, and facilities funds, but again, not that teacher assistance money and some of those other things, family engagement and special populations funds. So again, that facilities fund is a fund that's eligible to both Seattle Preschool Program and Pathway programs to apply to in order to expand their program, whether it's through remodeling a facility, existing, or new facility. So, all of this was a lot to hear as far as the funding goes, and it sometimes explaining it gets people more confused than clear about how it works. So for this reason, we have our finance team available to do a technical work session on December 1st from 1:30 to 3:30 at the 2100 building. Please bring a completed Exhibit B and any finance staff with you if you have them, and they're going to be able to provide probably our best estimate on what the reimbursement would look like for your program were you to be selected for SPP or SPP pathway. So I think this is a really great opportunity. These will only be for planning purposes, but I think they'll be able to answer your questions in more detail. So please take advantage of this. So how will the RFI be evaluated? So you'll see again, you can follow along on RFI page 9, but there'll be 5 narrative questions that are up to 10 points possible, and that comprises Exhibit A. We'll be looking for answers around program experience, program successes, experience engaging families, working with diverse groups, and descriptions of qualified staff, retaining, recruiting, and so on, qualified staff. You do not need to fill out multiple Exhibit A's for multiple sites. You can just fill out one, and that will work for even if your program is applying multiple sites. But site level information will be scored separately. That's Exhibit B for different sites. And you'll see that it's an Excel sheet that leaves space for you to discuss multiple sites, multiple classrooms. And so as long as you fill that out completely for all, reflecting all the sites you're applying, we'll be able to score each of those sites separately. And you'll see first here, up to 30 points on that section is high need locations, and that's what really reflects those separate scorings. As your sites are in different locations, they'll be scored differently as far as high need locations. There's also 10 points for serving low-income children and 10 points for high-quality practice. And please look to page R on the RFI, page 10 and 11 for definitions of what we're talking about when we talk about high-need locations, low-income children, and high-quality practice. So points earned in this section are based on whether or not you meet the criteria. They're really just an all or nothing type section. It's just a yes or a no. You'll only need to fill out one Exhibit B to reflect your multiple sites. There should be columns enough to fill all the sites and classrooms that you are applying. So there's only one difference between SPP and SPP pathway evaluation. So within our SPP pathway program, any applicant that is registered in Early Achievers and is already participating in Level 2 activities will be awarded an additional 5 points for that participation in Early Achievers Level 2 activities. So in the event that we do receive applicants who score identically across these measures, we do have 3 tiebreakers. And so we'll be looking at schools located where there is a higher population of English language learners in the local elementary school, where a provider is able to provide more classrooms in comparison to another, or a preschool classroom that's located near a local elementary school that has an increased percentage across the last 2 years of incoming kindergartners. And we have the data here. You do not need to submit any information about these tiebreakers. We have data to determine if your program, where your program is located, and thus how it would score on these measures. So the evaluation process, there'll be an initial screening to look at the completeness of your application, and please see the checklist to make sure that your application is complete. There'll be an RFI panel that rates the applications. We will be doing site visits, and we do reserve the right to do interviews in case we have additional questions for certain providers. And then we'll be notifying successful applicants. So let's talk a little bit more about how you will be submitting your RFI. So again, this is a competitive process, and there's no guarantee of funding. And you must complete the RFI materials and submit it by the deadline to be considered. And as we said earlier, it's only one application for both programs, whether that's SPP or SPP pathway. So you need to submit both Exhibit A, those narrative questions we talked about, and Exhibit B, which is that site level specific information. A note here is that if you are a program located in a Seattle Public Schools building, you will need to provide documentation that you notified the SPS Alignment Coordinator, Susan Hall, and we have her information here for your convenience. So Exhibit A must not exceed 10 pages. Any pages exceeding that limit will not be considered. And below here is the narrative, the conventions that those narrative questions should be submitted in. Please submit 9 paper copies that must be received, we just want to be as clear as possible, must be received by December 14th at 4:30 p.m. And additionally submit an electronic copy, whether that's in Word or PDF form, to the email listed, francisrobinson@seattle.gov. And there are naming conventions that are on page 9 of the RFI to lead you. If you have any issues with the submission of the documents, please either call or email Francis Robinson. So let's look here on that timeline. The RFI was released on the 13th. We've held 2 info sessions. The technical work session will be on the 1st. The last day to submit any questions to us will be on the 4th. And again, we need to have applications in hand here December 14th by 4:30, no later than 4:30. So whether that's by mail or if you want to drop it off in person, just make sure that you have enough time to get it here on the 14th by 4:30. The RFI panel will meet between December 16th and January 20th. We'll be holding those site visits mid-January, and then we'll be notifying successful applicants by January 28th. And then the contracts will begin September 1st. So again, just to be as clear as possible, proposals are due by the 14th, no later than 4:30. Please follow the required response format. Submit 9 paper copies and an electronic file. If you have any questions about the RFI itself, any questions just about the different programs, please email Mouse V by the close of business on December 4th. We have 3 business days to answer those questions, and phone calls are not best. We'd love to see those questions in writing. So if you could just email Mouse V, and her email's right there. And make sure that the person that you list on your cover sheet can be reached by the phone number and email that you've listed. So in case you need any background on any of SPP, SPP pathway, and so on, please see the documents that are listed at our website. And so the submittal of questions, we will be answering any questions that are submitted to us within 3 business days, and they'll be up on our website at that address. Again, phone calls are not ideal. Email would be best so we can see them in writing and have time to make sure that we're answering them as accurately as possible. And we'll be taking questions until December